Structure and functions of the plant and animal cell. The basic unit of life. The cell is considered as the basic unit of life. All the living matter are composed of cells. Cells are very small. In 1665, Robert Hooke observed a section of a cork using the microscope prepared by him. He discovered a structure like chambers in a beehive and he named them as cells. So this is similar to what he observed under the microscope. So you can see, right? There are chambers, there are structures which are similar to the chambers in a beehive. So he named those structures as cells. Sladen, Shawn and Rudolf Virchow introduced the cell theory, observing the different live tissue through the microscope. That means there is a theory called cell theory. Sladen, Shawn and Rudolf Virchow introduced the cell theory. Cell theory was based on the facts revealed by observing the different live tissues through the microscope. Now this cell theory contains three main points. The structural and functional unit of life is the cell. All organisms are made up of one or more cells. New cells are formed from pre-existing cells. The first point, structural and functional unit of life is the cell. That means the basic functional and structural unit is the cell. All the organisms are made up of one or more cells. Some organisms are made up of only one cell. Some organisms are made up of many cells. New cells are formed from pre-existing cells. That means, how are these new cells formed? By the cells that were there earlier. That is what we mean by pre-existing cells. They were existing earlier. So from the existing cells, the new cells are formed. Concept of the cell. Actually, cell is the smallest structural unit of the living body. The living matter are composed of tiny cells together. There are two types of organisms depending on the number of cells in the body. Unicellular and multicellular. Unicellular organisms means they only have one single cell in their body. Multicellular means these organisms are having many cells in the body. More than one cell. Actually, these cells perform different functions in the body. For an example, transportation of oxygen, transmission of impulses, photosynthesis. Like that, cells perform different functions. Accordingly, the smallest biounit that is adapted to perform a particular function is the cell. So, it is clear that the structural and functional unit of life is the cell. These cells differ from each other by shape, size and function. That means some cells can have this kind of circular shape. Some cells may be star-shaped. Some cells may be rod-shaped. Like that, you can have different shapes of the cells. You can see different cells with different shapes. Some cells are small. Some cells are very large. So, cells are different in size. And also cells can be different in functions. Some cells perform a different task. Some cells perform another different task. Like that. Many of the cells cannot be observed through the naked eye. That means they have to be observed through the light microscope or either electron microscope. Only few cells can be observed by the naked eye. That means you can see only few cells, few types of cells. You cannot see every cell by the naked eye. Therefore, you have to use a microscope. Let's look at the structure of the cell. Let's look at what a typical cell means. A typical cell means a cell where you get all the types of organelles. But generally, in real life, you don't find typical cells. Now, the cell. If you draw something like this is a cell. So, in the cell, you get a large structure, something like this. This is called as nucleus. Okay, this is called as nucleus. Inside of the cell, you get a large nucleus, generally. So this outer covering is known as the plasma membrane. Plasma membrane or the cell membrane. Generally, a cell is covered by this cell membrane. Sometimes you get a cell wall also. Cell wall. Another outer layer. So, in plant cells, you get this cell wall. Cell wall. This plasma membrane, that means this outer covering, is a semi-permeable membrane. That means it only allows certain substances to pass across the cell. That means if you get the plasma membrane, this is the nucleus. Now the substances are coming in and out of the cell now. So this plasma membrane only allows certain substances to pass through the cell membrane. Not everything is taken in or given out. Only certain things are given out by this plasma membrane. So this plasma membrane is controlling what is taken into the cell and what is given out of the cell. Therefore, it is called as semi-permeable and selectively permeable membrane. That means it is selective. Permeable means you can pass across. So, semi-permeable means only certain substances can be passed across this membrane. This nucleus, when you are talking about the nucleus, it is actually a large cell organelle present in the cell. Almost every cell there is a nucleus. In the cell, generally, the nucleus is located at the center. Center, like this, in the middle, the center. So, therefore, we call it as centralized nucleus. Centralized nucleus. Okay. So, what about the rest? This space, apart from the nucleus, this space is known as this space. That is known as the cytoplasm. Cytoplasm. Cytoplasm means the space where the nucleus and the other cell organelles are there. The tiny, now in the cell you get the nucleus, and there are certain other structures also. Some other structures also, they are tiny structures. So these are known as cell organelles. Cell organelles. Cell organelles. So these structures, these structures perform different functions in the cell. So all the cell organelles are there in this cytoplasm. Okay. Most of the organelles, you can't observe it. Actually, you have to observe it under the microscope. Most of the cell organelles. Mostly, the cell organelles cannot be observed through the light microscope. You have to use a much more stronger microscope. That means electron microscope to observe the cell organelles. So you can see this diagram. Most of the cell organelles cannot be observed through the light microscope because they are tiny. Therefore, you have to use a much stronger microscope. That means the electron microscope. Then you can see the cell organelles which are inside of the cell. Now in this diagram, it shows the things that are inside of the cell. For an example, ribosome, chloroplast, mitochondria, then Golgi vesicles, like that. Generally, the animal cell and the plant cell contains different parts. That means, for an example, animal cells are not having a cell wall, but the plant cells are having a cell wall. In the animal cell, you get a large cytoplasm, but in the plant cell, cytoplasm is not that prominent. It's actually pushed towards the periphery. That means it's pushed away. If you get the plant cell, the cytoplasm is pushed towards the outer side of the cell. In the animal cell, you don't get a large vacuole. Vacuole means something like this. In the plant cell, if you get this as the plant cell, you get a large vacuole. This is the nucleus. So you get this is the large vacuole which is inside the cell. In the animal cell, you don't have a vacuole. So in the plant cell, you have a large vacuole. You have this cell wall. I'll draw it a bit thicker. Cell wall. Okay, this is the cell wall. Then the vacuole, like that. In the animal cell, there is no cell wall. Only the plasma membrane is there. And there is no vacuole also. And in the animal cell, no chloroplasts are there. In the plant cell, you have the chloroplasts here and there, something like this. Okay. In the plant cell, you have the chloroplasts, but in the animal cell, you don't have the chloroplasts. Cell organelles and structures present in the cell. Now, as I told you, there are certain tiny structures inside of the cell. They are known as the organelles. Let's look at the structures that are inside of the cell and which are covering the cell. First one is the cell wall. If you get a cell, something like this. If you get a cell, you can see something covering the cell, a thick layer which is covering the cell, that is known as the cell wall. So these cell walls are present in plant cells. Sometimes, most of the time, these cell walls are made up of cellulose material. This is the cell wall. Cellulose is a material from which these cell walls are made. Sometimes you get other substances also, but the main material that is used to make the cell walls are the cellulose. Actually, this cell wall is there to support the cell, to maintain the shape, to support and for the protection of the cell. This cell wall is actually a dead structure. It is not living. It's strong, but it's not living. It's a dead structure. So that is about the cell wall. Then comes the plasma membrane. Plasma membrane is something like this. The structure that is covering the cell. So we discussed earlier, the plasma membrane also has different functions. Plasma membrane is actually there interior to the cell wall. That means if the cell wall is there, if the cell wall is there in the outside, the plasma membrane is inside of the cell wall. You can see this membrane is inside of the cell wall. This plasma membrane, if you get the animal cell, you can see this is the plasma membrane. It is made up of phospholipids and proteins. Phospholipids and proteins. Plasma membrane is a semi-permeable membrane. Actually, the main function of the plasma membrane is to enclose the cell. That means it is enclosing the contents inside of the cell. It's acting as a covering. It is selectively permeable to certain substances. It controls the entry of the substances into the cell, and the substances that are going out also is controlled by this plasma membrane. It's just like a gate. It's open to certain substances and closed to certain substances. This plasma membrane is also known as the cell membrane. Membrane covering the cell, or plasma membrane. Membrane. Cytoplasm. Now let's look at what this cytoplasm is. Now if you get the cell like this, you get this space. This is known as the cytoplasm. Cytoplasm. There are cell organelles also, tiny structures also. So all these nucleus and these cell organelles are there in the cytoplasm. It is a gelatinous substance. Cytoplasm is a gelatinous substance. When you remove the organelles, you get the cytoplasm in the cell. Actually, in the cytoplasm, you get inorganic and organic substances dissolved. It's like a gelatinous liquid in the cell where all the organelles are there. Actually, this cytoplasm maintains the shape of the cell, and it also holds the cell organelles. It is the liquid that is holding all these cell organelles. And also this cytoplasm is carrying out metabolic activities. The structures that are in the cytoplasm, they are the ones which you call as the organelles. Some organelles are surrounded by the cell membranes. For an example, mitochondria, nucleus, Golgi complex, endoplasmic reticulum. Those structures are also surrounded by a cell membrane. That means the cell organelles inside some cell organelles, let's say mitochondria. So if you take it outside, if it's something, this is mitochondria. So it is also covered by a cell membrane. So therefore, certain structures inside of the cell, certain organelles are covered by a cell membrane. Nucleus. Nucleus is the organelle that is present mostly in the center. This is the nucleus. Note the spellings. This is the nucleus. Nucleus is the main organelle in the cell. It is the main one. It is surrounded by a nuclear envelope. So we say envelope is a covering, right? This nucleus, when you take it out, nucleus is also surrounded by a nuclear envelope. Okay, it is surrounded by a nuclear envelope. One or two nucleolus and the chromatin body are present in the nucleus. Actually, this nucleus is important in the cell division. The functions of chromosomes are the storage of genetic material and transfer inherited characters from the generation to generation. That means this nucleus is responsible and it is helping in the cell division. The functions of chromosomes. The nucleus is having chromosomes, and these chromosomes are responsible in transmitting the genetic information from generation to generation. Inside of the nucleus, you get the chromosomes in different numbers in different species. For an example, inside this nucleus, there are 4 to 6 chromosomes in the human being. In frogs, you get 26 chromosomes. In a paddy plant, you get 24 chromosomes in the nucleus. Like that, the number of chromosomes in the nucleus is different in different species. This nucleus is actually controlling the activities of the cell. It is located at the center most of the time, and it is acting as the center which is controlling the activities of the cell. Mitochondria is an oval or rod-shaped membrane-bound organelle. That means mitochondria is something like this. It is oval-shaped or rod-shaped. It's a membrane-bound organelle. It is having a membrane. It is also, this cell organelle is also having a membrane. Aerobic respiration reactions take place here in the mitochondria and it releases energy. Aerobic respiration means respiration in the presence of oxygen. Mitochondria is actually generating energy. This energy is used to, it is generating energy, and this energy is used for the metabolic activities of the cell. Actually, it is acting as a powerhouse. It is generating energy. And also it is a membrane-bound organelle. It is having a membrane covering that. Golgi complex. Golgi complex is also a membrane-bound cell organelle. Something like this. Golgi complex. It is stacked on top of each other like this. On top of each other, it's stacked. This entire structure is known as the Golgi complex. So this is the Golgi complex. This Golgi complex helps in the transportation. Endoplasmic reticulum. Endoplasmic reticulum is the inner membranous network. It is made up of flat tubes, flat or tubular sacs. Actually, it is made up of tubular sacs. Endoplasmic reticulum. Endoplasmic reticulum is the intermembranous network. It's a network. It is made up of flat sacs or tubular sacs. It is there in the cytoplasm. This endoplasmic reticulum is of two types. That means there are two types of endoplasmic reticulum depending on the presence of the ribosomes. They are the rough endoplasmic reticulum and the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. The rough endoplasmic reticulum is having ribosomes attached to its surface, its membrane. Now if you get the endoplasmic reticulum like this, if you get these sacs, now you can see tiny ribosomes are attached to the membrane of the rough endoplasmic reticulum. Here and there tiny structures are attached. Okay, so this function of this rough endoplasmic reticulum is to transport the proteins within the cell. They are transporting the proteins in the cell. The next type of endoplasmic reticulum is the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. That is, it is a network of tubular sacs without ribosomes. So it doesn't have this ribosomes attached like this. It doesn't have it. There are no ribosomes. So actually the smooth endoplasmic reticulum is helping in the synthesis of lipids. That means the production of lipids, steroids, and also transport them within the cell. They help in the production of lipids, steroids, and they help to transport them within the cell, inside the cell. So you get rough endoplasmic reticulum and smooth endoplasmic reticulum. The functions are different. In the rough endoplasmic reticulum, you get the ribosomes attached. In the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, you don't have the ribosomes attached. That is the main difference. Vacuole. What is vacuole? Vacuole is a large fluid-filled organelle found in the plant cells only. In the animal cells, as I told you, there are no vacuoles. If you get the plant cell, something like this, you get a large vacuole. It is a large, very large organelle, and inside of this you get fluid. And vacuole is surrounded by a membrane. It has a membrane. This membrane is called as the tonoplast. This surrounding membrane is called as the tonoplast. The fluid inside this liquid, or this fluid inside the vacuole covered by this tonoplast, this fluid is known as the cell sap. Actually, certain substances are dissolved here. You get certain substances dissolved in the vacuole. They may be water, sugar, ions, pigments even. You get different substances dissolved in the vacuole. Most of the time you don't get vacuoles in the animal cell. Rarely you might have tiny vacuoles, but generally you don't get vacuoles in the animal cell. Only in the plant cells you get the vacuoles. In unicellular organisms, that means the organisms which have only one single cell, you get the contractile vacuoles. That means vacuoles can contract. Ribosomes. Structures like this, they are not covered by a membrane. They are actually membraneless. That means they don't have membrane. They have this large subunit and the small subunit. One large subunit, which is large, and one small subunit. They are found freely in the cytoplasm. If you get the cell and you get the nucleus, they are found freely in these actually tiny organelles. They are found freely in the cytoplasm, or else they can be found attached to the endoplasmic reticulum. This is the endoplasmic reticulum. So these ribosomes are attached to the tiny ribosomes are attached to the endoplasmic reticulum. So the function of this ribosomes is to help in the protein synthesis. Actually, it's a place of protein synthesis. That means where the proteins are generated, proteins are produced.